Hi, I'm Annalise Jones with Lucia Learning, and we're having a conversation today with Emily Fotheringham, who is my sister. And we are going to talk about creating a culture of learning in your home. So this applies to both homeschoolers and public schoolers. It applies to everybody, regardless of what you're doing for your formal education. We can all raise our families with education in mind and just create a certain culture in the home that can encourage them to be curious and to love learning. So this is what we're talking about this morning. Okay, Emily, tell us about yourself.
My name is Emily Fotheringham. I am the mother of four children. We have three boys who are 10, 8, and 6, and then a 4-year-old daughter. And we do kind of a hybrid homeschooling where we're through a charter school. We homeschool 3.5 days of the week, and then they're at the school for 1.5 days.
And what are some big interests in your family? We'll get more into it.
We really like music and being outside and swimming and art and space.
Cool. Yeah, whatever the topic of the year is, right? Because it was dinosaurs for a while.
Well, one of my sons still really loves dinosaurs. So sometimes it's dinosaurs. I
All
don't
right.
know. They're
So
kind
you
of
had like a
whatever they
very
like.
boy family culture, and then your daughter came along. But now is it still a lot of boy stuff?
Yeah, because we don't limit our daughter to the idea of like you have to play with dolls, you have to do this, you have to do that. So sometimes she's playing with Hot Wheels and sometimes she's putting on makeup.
Yeah, I bet things have changed to be more girly, but I remember you telling me like when she was little, those were just the toys you had in the house. So she got really used to boy toys.
Well, yeah, but she still loves like cars and stuff. Like my husband just acquired a Mustang and she loves to go out in the Mustang.
Oh, and just sit there
And
for fun.
and well, no, she likes to go for drives in the
Oh,
Mustang.
that's fun that she's so into cars.
Yep.
Okay, I'll introduce myself for those not familiar with me. Um, I have 5 kids. The oldest graduated a year ago. He's 19. And then I have a 16-year-old girl, a 12-year-old boy, an 8-year-old girl, and an almost 5-year-old girl. And both of us have been doing what we're doing since our kids were big, little, right? So we never pulled our kids out of school. Both of us made the decision early on to homeschool. And we can talk about how we came to that if we want to, like as that's relevant too. Okay, so first, we are sisters, and so we wanted to talk about the culture of home when we were growing up. Now we went to public school growing up. We were a typical family, just going to school, having extracurriculars, having lots of homework assignments. But we would you say we had the reputation as the smart family? And
Yeah,
this came up, this
definitely.
came up. We were playing a game the other day, like how well do you know someone or whatever. And there was a question of like, what personality trait do you share with your siblings the most? And so it was about me. I was trying to get my kids to guess it. And I'm like, what are the Gremliches known for, guys? And they didn't know. Like, I don't know if I expressed this to them, but I'm like, we were always known as like that smart, like the nerdy family, that smart family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think because our older brother was super smart. So as soon as I was in elementary school, they're like, oh, is he your brother? And there were like certain expectations placed. Like, okay, you're from the smart family. We expect big things from you.
Yeah, definitely.
So what made our family smart? I think it was the culture of learning we had at home. So, and it's not just straight up learning, like it includes other things like music and conversations and just the culture of the home. So
Yeah.
to start us out with something, some sort of memory, or how would you describe the Gremlage family growing up?
Well, I think that there was, well, first of all, I remember sitting down and doing homework and always having access to a parent. And so I know it's like a school thing, but there were people at school that would tell me, like, oh, your mom can help you with your math. My
Wow.
parents couldn't help me with math past fourth grade or something like that. And it just being shocking to me that there were people in this world that had parents that couldn't sit down and learn with them.
Yeah.
And like mom to the extent, like she would always help with math, but she wouldn't always remember it. And she could just take the book and scan the chapter that we had learned and then sit down and help us with it. And she was just always willing to be involved.
Yeah, gosh, that's a big thing we took for granted because you're right. Because now that I'm grown up and I'm working with other families, it is a special thing when the moms are able to help out more. And for whatever reason, like maybe it's a time issue. I mean, if there's a lot of younger siblings in the way, it's hard for parents to sit home, and it's hard for me to sit home and do a whole lot of one-on-one stuff with my older kids. So that's a really nice thing when the moms are available and willing. I would say willing to learn alongside them, right? Like if
Well,
you're
I I remember dad sitting down too. And with dad, it was always, I think it was like a culture of learning thing with dad when he helped with homework, because he didn't just sit down and tell me how to do the physics problem. It frustrated me as a teenager, but it helped me learn better. He would always sit down and say, well, how do you think we should do this?
Yeah, okay, I remember that. I would be asking dad, how do you spell this word? And he would go, how do you think you spell it? Like he would always put it back on me and make me think, right?
Yeah. So, and I think that helps with the culture of learning. And I do that with my kids now. Like one of them who struggles a little bit with spelling, he'll say, how do you spell this word? And I find myself saying, well, how do you think you spell it?
That's cool. I don't do that very well. Because I admit a lot of words, spellings just don't make sense. So you just have to memorize it. Okay, so how about the fact that both of our parents spoke different languages? That was a part of our family culture that we would hear. Now, it wasn't like being spoken of in full conversations, but we would hear a lot of terms thrown around that would make me curious, and then kind of showed me that it's cool to speak another language, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I kind of I thought it was so cool that I've never fluently learned another language, but I find myself I keep dabbling in other languages just because oh, it's super cool. I want to learn how to say something in Spanish or German or depending on what point of my life is in. When I was at BYU, I was a folk dancer and we would do Hungarian dances and we would have to sing in Hungarian. And I just thought that was like the coolest thing.
Did that
So,
play
and
into why you got into folk dance?
no, I just have this love of cultures and dancing. And so they smush together in folk dance.
Yeah. So dad was always super helpful, super cheerful. And so when he would combine that with an Italian saying, like when it's dinner time, he would say mangiamo, right? I don't know if I'm saying it right, but things like that where like in my mind there's an association where like Italians are happy people and
Oh
it's
yeah, yeah.
fun.
Or
It's
he would be
fun
like,
to have
apre
another.
la bocca,
Yeah.
like feeding the little kids. He would
Yeah.
always talk in
Our dad's
Italian also.
super cute and animated. And then I guess it was mostly dad actually, because even like mom spoke German. She didn't really say it a whole lot, but she would help me with my German homework. Dad would say Italian things sometimes and then German things sometimes, right? Like when we were leaving
Uh-huh.
the house, he would say Raus, right?
Yes.
See, these things have stuck with me so much. So it's
And
funny,
I find
like sometimes
myself
his accent
saying,
is German. Some we probably didn't know when we were little. Like he was just talking nonsense. We didn't know what was what.
well, I find myself saying some of those phrases that they said a lot growing up to my kids,
Oh
and then
yeah.
realizing, like, wait, you don't even know what that means.
And it became relevant because I mean, we grew up and learned that our family culture is actually German slash Swiss, right? So dad's dad was born in Switzerland and was an immigrant when he was young, and that made us really interested. And if we read some of his letters, well, his letters weren't in German, but just referring to his German family, Swiss, sorry, German language.
Well, well, his mom was born in Germany, so he has German family too.
Oh, okay.
But
So
I
then,
do have in my baby book, there are cards that are written in German from some of those
oh,
people
okay,
in
I don't have that. That's
Switzerland and
fine.
Germany.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't have their immigration story. I wish they had written that down and given it to us in our family history. So that's kind of missing. But that did influence me. Like I chose to take German in high school when we chose a language. I was like, well, German's a cool language, and that's what my ancestors do. So
Yeah.
I'm going to do German. I didn't do very well in it, but then also as far as other countries, do you think like so we grew up with quite a culture of listening to music, and I think that sparked
Mhm.
a lot of curiosity as well because we were listening to classical music, and then we would watch the movie Amadeus. So I knew that Mozart also spoke German. He was from Austria, and a lot more of those like world culture, giving you some background and context to the history of the world, came up naturally, I think, because of that culture.
Well, and also it was even to the point that like mom decided that she really liked India and Ireland. And I ended up also deciding that I really like India and Ireland, which could have an influence from her. And so she would send me like one birthday, she decided it was just going to be an Irish birthday. So she's sending me all the stuff that had to do with Ireland. Or she said, decided this birthday is going to be about Switzerland because Emily likes culture. So I'm going to send her all the stuff that has to do with Switzerland. Like I remember going to an Indian restaurant with her for my birthday one year. And so I think it was more than just the listening to music. It was just like the interest that she had that she talked about. And then I decided that those interests should be mine also.
And what that also shows me, yeah, exactly, that she was willing to be interested in what you're interested and come to you, right? So that's a culture of learning.
Yeah.
If we can notice those interests, those sparks of curiosity in our kids, and then build off of that, encourage that in them, that's really helpful
Yeah.
in family culture. So, and then back to the music, it's not just countries, but it's also history, right? Because like we listened to the Les Miserables soundtrack so much growing up, and I had never seen it. Like my whole experience with Les Mis was just the soundtrack. And
But the play Les Mis is so based on the music that I feel like
yeah,
we
exactly.
knew the
The stories
story
to the songs, yeah.
from just the soundtrack.
And that would lead to conversations, right? I mean, maybe that led to a prostitution conversation. I'm not sure, but it definitely led to, well, why are they fighting? What are they fighting for, right? So I learned nothing in school about history, but I knew about the French Revolution, even though this was a minor French Revolution, but I had some context there. And I remember asking mom, like, if he's a thief, if he stole, then why is he the good guy of the story? And she was able to explain,
Yeah.
like, this is such, like, I was in a very black and white world. I think our family in general was kind of black and white as far as morals, like
Yeah.
stealing is wrong. And so that's where I was coming from. And mom explained to me like the oppression of the government and why did he steal if he was so desperate because there was no opportunities and no way to take care of the poor people. And then do you think it was fair that he was in prison for 18 years for stealing a loaf of bread? And I was like, wow. So that just having the conversation through listening to music really got the wheels turning in my brain.
But then that those conversations about Les Mis specifically made it so that when I was a junior in high school and I had to do a book report and we were supposed to read a book over spring break, I for some reason decided I was going to read the unabridged version of Les Mis. And all those pages about the sewers of Paris and the backgrounds of the fighting and things, those I loved those being there, and I thought it helped me understand the book better, but it all comes back to like those conversations that we had earlier, I
So
think.
you were really, did you get an interest in Paris then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you did
So
some
when I
French
went to Europe, I had to go to Paris.
and look at the sewers.
Well, we didn't go in the sewers, but
Yeah. Okay, tell me about jazz music. That was more your thing than mine, but did that open up some curiosity to you? Did you learn about some of the mid 1900s with jazz culture?
yeah, because jazz is more than just a music. Was like a culture and still is a culture. And so I those like jazz music is the one section that I can tell you who plays the song, what the name of the song is, and dad and I could really bond over that. And I think other than the fact that I really like jazz music, I think a good bonding for me was that I could spend time with dad. So in a family of 8 kids, it was really important to me to find ways to spend time with dad as opposed to just saying, oh, I'm not going to get enough attention from him because of that. But then he again, like mom, oh, okay, Emily's interested in jazz music. And there was like people talk about what concerts have you been to? And I've been to 2 concerts and they were both jazz concerts with dad. And one of them was like in this club on the strip when Maynard Ferguson came and played. And our junior high school
Jazz
band
always has
director,
to be in a small, smoky club, right?
well, that time it was. So our junior high school band director had got was able to help us get tickets to this Maynard Ferguson concert. And dad knew that I just loved jazz music like him. And he was like, okay, let's go. And it was like late at night and I was in junior high. So, and it just seems still to this day funny to me that dad, who's fairly conservative and likes to go to bed kind of early, was
Yeah.
willing to do that. But then the time that it meant the most to me was when he won tickets to see Doc Severinsen, who was the original band director for The Tonight Show, and they played like big band style. And he could have taken anyone. He could have taken mom on a date, but he knew that I love jazz music too, so he took me instead. And then we joked around how we were the two youngest people in the room at the time.
Yeah. That's so special that you have those memories with dad, sharing an interest and passing on an interest to the generations. So how did that affect you getting into band?
Oh, so I watched dad play the saxophone growing up. And at first I thought, oh, I want to play the flute. I want to be girly and play the flute. But then just listening to jazz music where there is no flutes,
Mhm.
there's none of that girly kind of stuff, jazz. And so I just thought it was so cool what dad could do with a saxophone. It was so cool what saxophone sounded like in the jazz music that I decided, no, I had to play the saxophone. And once I was good enough, it became super important to me to be in the jazz band. And so I played in jazz band in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. And for me, being in the jazz band was like the funnest thing that I did in school.
That was such an important part of your growing up, right? Like if there's one thing
Uh-huh.
homeschoolers are missing, they need these fine arts. They need access to participate in these things. It's such a good experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What else about Greenwich culture? I would like 5 nights a week after dinner, you would find us playing games. We were very much a game family, right? And that led into logic puzzles. When Sudoku came out, everything
Yep.
was doing Sudoku every night. But like the game culture, I guess I didn't realize that wasn't totally normal. Like a lot of families might gather on the TV. We didn't have a lot of TV growing up. I remember just sneaking
Uh-uh.
it when mom wasn't home. I was sneaking the TV, but we didn't have a lot of options. Like we never had the HBO, like the special channels. It just,
Well, and I never realized how different we were until like you meet people when you're growing up. But then when I got married, my husband came from a family where they watched a lot more TV and a lot more movies of like popular movies. And so he's always like, "What? You've never seen the show? You've never seen this movie?" And we were like, "Yeah, we were sitting around playing games and
I
laughing
had
and
some catching
talking
up
with
to
each
do
other."
when I grew. Yeah.
Well, but the first time my husband came to mom and dad's house, we went out in the garage to get a game, and he was floored that there was this whole entire wall of the garage that was just full of different board games.
Right.
And he was like, "What is this?" Because they maybe had like 4 board games growing up. They played Monopoly and Stratego and not much else.
Okay, Lara's coming in, so we're gonna catch her up. Let's
Okay.
connect to the audio. Okay, Lara's our other sister. There's 3 of us sisters, and then we have 5 brothers. And Lara's here. So Lara, we talked about growing up with languages and growing up with music and how that led to some history and culture and jazz. So now we're talking about how we played games. Like we weren't so much a TV culture, but we were playing games a lot. So do you want to talk, Lara? You can listen for a bit if you want before you jump in. Games, I didn't really realize games were educational. It was just what we did. It was just our culture. But as a parent, looking back, I can totally see the value of playing games because like almost every game is educational, even if it's just getting you to think about strategy, right? Games really
Mm.
builds this foundation of logical thinking and quick thinking, right? I
Well,
think
and
games shapes your brain so much.
some of it was more than the logical thinking, I think, though, because like you remember playing chronology, like
I wasn't so big on that, but yeah. So some games are very straightforward academic teaching history.
yeah, but chronology I appreciated because you never really had to know the exact dates of things. You just had to know if it happened before or after something.
Right. So that's
But
a game you
that
can
for
play
me,
with guessing and then you learn as you go.
yeah, so chronology for me was the introduction to a lot of things that happened in history.
Right. Because you're
Like you'd
hitting
read a card and say, I didn't even know that even happened.
yeah. Have games led to anything in your guys' personal like that? It made you more interested in history. I'm thinking of like the game of life, which we didn't play growing up, but I played at friends' houses, made me
Yeah.
really interested in how money works. How does life work? How do you pay for bills? And like what do you stumble upon as you go throughout life, unexpected situations, and how do you resolve those situations? So that was a really
Yeah.
fun relevant game. Risk taught us about war, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But I mean, Risk really teaches you that war comes down to who has the strongest armies, right? And then strategy of choosing which way you're going to attack. And that's how wars happen. The reason wars take 5 years is because it's like one battle this way and then a different battle this way. And you
Yeah.
need time to think and strategize in between. So I think that's really reflective too. Any other
Yep.
any other thoughts about games?
Um, I just remember sitting around with mom doing puzzles a lot, like logic puzzles and crossword puzzles and
Okay, so
Oh,
would you say
yes.
that with the
I did
transition,
that too.
like when we were in high school, things almost shifted away from games and more into logic puzzles, but
yeah, a little
still
bit.
some games.
We would still play games like on the weekends and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but crossword puzzles was late at night when mom invited, well, do a bit before you head off to bed or, you know.
yeah, that was a great way to spend time together and figure, like a lot of times it wouldn't be a contest between us, it'd be like doing a Sudoku together and just trying to
Yeah.
do teamwork and come up with the answers together.
Yeah, or like the crossword puzzle and mom would read the clue and then we would discuss like what the answer could be.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we can't talk about logic puzzles without going back to Mr. Howlett. In elementary school, we were all in, did you have him too, Laura?
Yeah.
So we were all in the gifted education program. We had the most amazing mentor. He made such an influence on my life, and I wish
Oh
I
yeah, yeah,
could
yeah.
touch with him. I wish I could speak at his funeral and just say this man was so amazing. And but mom got into that too. We would bring home matrix puzzles and we would do it together. And so that contributed to our family culture, just having a cool mentor outside of our family, bringing that into our home.
Well, and those puzzles, I do those with my kids now.
Yeah, Elizabeth has designed her own.
Oh,
Yeah, those
yeah, I've
games
never
are
wanted to
great.
spend the time to do that.
Okay, so anything else that comes to mind about growing up Greenwich as far as a culture of learning? It was mostly in the home. We didn't go very many places. We weren't like a museum visiting family. I guess when we were out of town on trips, we would do history type of museums sometimes.
Like
Well, and we went
pioneer
to that.
museums.
Pioneer stuff. Oh, what was the thing that mom was dressed as a pioneer for? What event was that?
That was the old Mormon fort,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
event. Yeah.
Yeah, we grew up in Las Vegas, right? So there's that historical thing there, and she was involved with that.
Well,
And
she was part of the DUP, and so she could have gotten connected through that. But I have that picture. There's a one of her
uh,
friends did a painting of her in that pioneer outfit at
yeah.
the old Mormon fort.
So that led to some history in our culture, and then our family took a trip out to Nauvoo to see history.
Well, but bringing up that, I do feel like we did talk about like our ancestors, like the stories that they had. And so there was a value of like learning from people who had gone on before.
Yeah. Well, we need to bring that up for sure. Like mom got, whenever this started, she got so into family history that we would sit around the table and hear stories. And I have to admit, I was not listening to those stories. I was totally checked out. But I know it was important to her. So as I grew up, it became more important to me later on because obviously it plants a seed. It has an effect on you that way. And when you learn stories of ancestors, you're also learning the historical context and the geography of where they were and how life was at that time.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move to Laura. You haven't introduced your family yet, so go ahead and tell us how long you've been homeschooling and a little bit about your kids.
All right. We've been homeschooling the whole time. It was my husband's idea when the oldest was about 3. And I said, well, we're only in preschool. Let me think about that in a year or so. So I looked into myself, decided to do it. So right now I have 4 kids. They're 16, 13, 11, and 9.
Don't you think it's interesting? We all came to the decision to homeschool, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And not because we were homeschooled, right? But I think because we learned to love education. And wouldn't you say that we just want to be involved in our kids' education? Because my decision,
Yeah.
Yeah, my personal decision was like I was doing so much with Rich and P, and then when he turned 5, and I was like, "Oh, you're old enough to go to school now." And I was like, "I don't want him to go to school. We're having so much fun learning already. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing."
Well, I think beyond the like, it's fun to learn with your kids. I came to homeschool, well, our hybrid thing that we do, because I could personalize the schooling to my kids more. I started realizing like my oldest, he's super smart and advanced in some subjects. He'd be the kid that was sitting there bored every day. And so now I can work him ahead in whatever I feel like he needs to be worked ahead in. And my second and third one, they are the kids that they would also get bored because they're smart, but then they would start acting out. They'd be the kids that were in trouble all the time because they were so bored. And so I decided if I could have, if I could personalize their schooling, if I could say, you want to learn about this? Okay, let's figure out how to learn about it and not have to tell them, oh, well, you're going to have to learn about it at a different time because your school doesn't teach that.
Or you're too young. You feel like
Or
in
you're too
public school,
young.
you're too young
Yeah.
because that's a fifth grade thing.
Yes, yes. Whereas at our house, like, if you want to learn it, let's figure out a way for you to learn it at the level that you're at. You can always simplify things to any level.
I
Yeah.
think that's a
I
huge.
remember,
Go ahead.
oh, I remember learning a math skill. I think something about long division earlier than I learned in school from dad because I asked him, well, how do you do this? Because I want to know now. And he just showed me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big part of homeschool is just being flexible and do different subjects at different times. Whenever they're interested in a subject, if they're interested in space, we go into space. But if there was in a classroom, they'd be like, "Oh, we're not covering that unit this year. Maybe you'll do it in 3rd grade," or however that works. But do you think we were able to personalize our education growing up, or would you just say our other interests came up after school when we were home? Because how do we apply this to public schoolers?
Um, there's some personalization that happened. Like I fell in love with anthropology because as a senior in high school, we told them I don't have a car. I need to have all the classes, even though seniors didn't have to have all the classes. And
Extra classes.
and they gave me 5 classes instead of 7. And so at the last minute, I had to pick 2 extra electives, and I ended up in a sociology class and an anthropology class just because it sounded interesting. And then that anthropology class that I took led to this like lifelong love of anything that has anything to do with a culture from anywhere.
So such a good example that public schoolers could take away from this is like, if you have a culture of learning in your home, maybe we can inspire our kids not just to do the bare minimum. Like if they have extra hours at school, but you already have your credits, go ahead and be curious and pick another class, right? Just for
Yeah,
the sake of learning, not just to get the graduation requirements done.
but
Well,
then also at this, go ahead, Laura.
I ended up in geology my senior year of high school as well. And that's what I ended up majoring in. But I think the attitude that helped there was if you have a love of learning, you don't care whether a class is the smart class or gonna help you with college or whatever. So when I said I was taking geology, it had that reputation of being, oh, well, that's the easy one. Why are you taking that one?
Really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, if you like it. And I think like a public school person could also understand though that there are out there like homeschool curriculum type things that are more an independent learning thing that doesn't take a lot of time every day that you can purchase and give to your kids anyways. Like I have a son who's really into art and he really wanted to learn how to make comics. And I just stumbled across this company that had 2 volumes of teaching kids how to make comics, like a comic book kind of thing. And I literally just handed it to him and I have not had to help him with a single thing. And so, like, if you're looking for a way for your kid to not be on the screen a lot, there are resources out there of things that you can get that could be like an after school thing, but it still supports what the kid wants to learn and it supports like a culture of learning even after school.
And I think this love of learning it overflows into college, because once you get into college, if you're not used to thinking about, well, what do I have to do? What are the requirements? Then college is such an amazing big open world with so many opportunities. And even today, I'm torn because there's a conversation, especially amongst homeschoolers, is college necessary? It's so expensive. It doesn't lead to very much learning. You learn on the job anyway. Like, if people think college is for a job, then yes, they have a lot of arguments there. But to me, I'm like, my college years were the best years of my life. Like, I don't care if it led to a job. It was so fun and amazing to look through a course catalog and to pick and choose whatever I felt like learning. And like in my last year of college, I discovered, wait a minute, there's all these PE and dance classes, like all these fun classes that I could have been doing in addition to the bookwork classes.
No, I totally agree with you. I loved college because because of growing up, I just love learning. Just learning about things.
Yeah, all of us have done college. 8 kids, we've all done college. And I think we've enjoyed it. And even so, when we get together, we're having like brainiac conversations. We get deep on things. We're big conversationalists. So back to personalization, we did have some opportunities. I was thinking, like, Laura, you went to a charter school. I don't remember how that opportunity came up in the first place, because Eric did it first, but you and Eric went to the math and science school. And you didn't end up cheering in that. So why were you drawn to the math and science school? And then did it not end up being your thing, or was it still just great anyway?
Well, I graduated in science
Yeah.
for
But
college.
yeah, but probably not. I mean, like, were you introduced? Oh, you were introduced through geology through that school.
Yeah.
Because I
And
was thinking,
I had to take a science class my senior year. So that was one reason I took a science in my senior year.
because you had already taken the regular required physics,
Yeah,
chemistry.
it was a math and science class, so you had to take math and science every year.
Yeah. And then I heard about an opportunity to go to a concurrent college school. And I was just, at that time in my life, I was more about how fast can I get through the system. So I wanted to start college early. But it also inspired me again because I saw the course catalog is so inspiring. And then I had professors, I would say in high school, you have more teachers where it's just their job. They're probably overwhelmed with problems, bureaucracy, classroom management. But then once I got into college, I had professors who loved their subject. And I was so inspired to be exposed, because two that come to mind was Carlos Campo, who was like the Shakespeare. He got me into Shakespeare, and the literature just came alive, flowing out of his mouth. And then I had a geography teacher. He would show us all these slides from his trips about land formations. And he was so giddy. And I don't really care about geography that much, but he made me interested because he was so excited about it. So like the value of a good mentor who's excited and passionate about their topic can't be overstated.
Well, just want to bring up really fast though, like it's okay though if a kid doesn't want to do concurrent and doesn't want to do homeschool and doesn't want to do a charter school, whatever, because I just went to the normal public school, and my big draw to go to the normal public school is that music was extremely important to me. And I wanted to be in the marching band. And in Las Vegas, if you want to be in certain band programs, especially marching band, you have to just go to a normal public school.
Yeah, they're the good places for fine arts, right? Unless you were going to go
Yeah,
to Las Vegas Academy, that they were really big on the fine arts.
they were really big on the fine arts, but they didn't have a marching band.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do marching band. And so I stayed in a public school for the music benefits that I got.
Yeah. So this is something Audrey Rindlisbacher talks about. She kind of defines homeschooling, and it's not just you're not enrolled in public school, you're at home. It's more of this culture and environment. Like if you're homeschooling, your family loves education, and that might involve choosing a school to attend that fits your vision, that fits what that child desires in life. They're still homeschooled because homeschool incorporates delegating things off, outsourcing and finding the best opportunities for that child. So it's kind of an outside the box way to thinking, like, technically we're all homeschoolers. We all come home from school and do our homework. We learn at home, but then what opportunities are we choosing to sign up for?
Yeah.
So let's talk now about, we haven't covered a learning environment. Like, what would you call a learning rich environment? What's on the walls of your home, or what are your kids just exposed to in their day-to-day life that would inspire them to love learning? Any thoughts on that?
I think the major thing is limit the screens. So learning happens in the home when first they get bored because they're not
You have to
entertained
get
every
bored,
single
right?
second of the word. They have to be like, well, what am I gonna do?
Yeah. And I think another thing on learning is having lots of books sitting around. People sometimes laugh when we go to the library because, especially over the summer, when we do the summer reading program, I will have like 100 books checked out from the library. And some of them are fiction, some of them are nonfiction, like a wide variety of things. I let my kids pick whatever they want. And if they're sitting around and then they get bored, they start picking up the books and reading the books. And my oldest is so into reading that there's times that he's not responding. I'm like yelling from the other room or something. And so I go to find out why he's not responding to me. And he's just so engrossed in a book that he doesn't even realize that I'm trying to get his attention.
That's
But
so
that can't,
rewarding as a parent to see your kids get engrossed in books.
yeah, but it can't happen unless I have all these books laying around. And he has his own bookshelf. Like all of our kids, well, except for the youngest because she doesn't read yet, but all of our kids have their own bookshelves in their room. And the youngest, she even though she can't read, she'll sit on the couch and turn pages
Exactly. My sister
and
did that. She would
mimic
just read to
that she's
herself when she was
reading.
like 3 years old, and she would, look at those pictures and just because she wanted to do what everyone else is doing. So you flip pages in a book.
Yeah, and then she'll take books in her room and put them on this little shelf that's not a bookshelf, but these are her books, and you're not allowed to read them unless she tells you that you can read them.
I think that's such that I hadn't even thought about that, but the value of having every kid having their own bookshelf in their own room and maybe their own books that they own, because that way it'll be valuable to them. They'll like take some pride and ownership over this concept of books, and they can build a collection. That seems like really powerful. I think I'll actually, I'm learning from this conversation. I'm going to implement that because that's so cool. Elizabeth does have her own collection in her room because she's picky. I remember Eric being like this. If Eric had a bookshelf in his room,
Oh,
right? He was
yes.
building
Yeah.
a book collection, and if we wanted to read one of his books, he'd be like, "Don't open the book more than this far. You're going to ruin my book."
Yes.
And Elizabeth's kind of like that too. She gets after Taylor for dog earing the pages, and she's like, "If you check, like, she has her rules about checking out her books from her bedroom."
No,
I
we see that if we own a book, obviously not library books, but if we own a book and it starts falling apart, we just see it as like our kids have used the book a lot, and then eventually we throw it away and replace it with a different book.
Yeah. I know people say that about their scriptures. Like, it's a good sign to see well-worn scriptures with markings and margin notes all over the place. That's a sign of someone who has read them a lot and loves them.
Yep.
And okay, that's another thing. Through Audrey Rinlisbacher, I learned to annotate my books, and I never read a book without a pen in my hand. And I'm always marking my book and writing down notes and page numbers for themes and quotes. And it's such an enriching experience. It gets so much more into my heart if I'm engaging with the book with a pen in my hand. But I think that's true what you said about having a book around. I know a homeschool mom who gave me that tip, and she would go to the library and just get a variety of books and bring them home and like leave them sitting out. Because you want, if the kids, especially if there's a little bit of a stubborn streak or, they don't want you telling them what to do, you just leave a book out. And this is hard for us in our family because my husband always wants to put the books away. Like, let's clean up, let's stack them up. And I'm like, no, they have to be laying out. So the kids will come and just open it up. And it works. You leave a book on the table, they're going to sit down and eat something and just open the book and get curious.
Yep.
And yeah, I know when I was growing up, mom had random books on bookshelves, and they were all her own books. They weren't necessarily educational books. But when I was bored, I would go look at the bookshelf and pull, I got into Louise Hay and psychology. I got into psychology because she had these interesting books, and which is funny, they're kind of categorized with psychology, but they're not exactly psychology. But they were interesting books, and on the back cover, it tells you what section it's in the bookstore. And her self-help books would say psychology. So that's what I thought psychology meant, was like all this self-help stuff. And so I majored in psychology, and I learned more about what actual psychology is. But that's how I got curious in it, is just pulling mom's books off the shelf.
Yeah.
Okay, learning environment. Let's see. We have maps on our walls. I've always been a fan of just having the maps on the walls. Taylor got really
Oh yeah, we have
interested
a
in
map
wanting
too.
wanting to learn what capital of every country there is. So yeah, like watch what's on your walls. I think if you have paintings on your walls, they'll be more interested in art. And as we've done our own
So,
things, I then hang them up. I display their work.
so the interesting thing about that is our kids really like painting and art, especially our oldest. And I think part of it started because I went to this paint night, where everyone paints the same picture. And I
Yeah.
wasn't super confident about my picture that came out. But my husband, when I came home, made a big deal about it and hung it up on the wall. And then periodically would talk about, yeah, you see that picture right there? Mom painted that picture. And so that kind of like opened up this world of like, oh, we can paint things, we can draw things. And so we have a lot on our walls that's either like family pictures or painting type things that
And do you know
it's
what
funny
else
that
that shows is that you can learn something at any point in life because you didn't paint until that happened, right?
yeah, and I've done a lot more painting now, but I didn't do any of that growing up. It kind of all started with my friends saying, "Come to this paint night. I'm having a paint night at my house."
So they can see us get interested in something and learn a new thing too. And that might inspire them to
Oh
try.
yeah. Yep. And it doesn't always be like I'm going to be inspired to try the same thing that my parents do. I think if they see us learning new things, that it like gives them the permission almost to think of things that they want to do.
Yeah.
And when they talk about like, oh, you're painting, you're doing this or whatever, then I always try to sit down and say, what would you like to do? Or like we come from a really musical family and I married someone who was in band, so music is a big thing. And for a family home evening night the other night, we actually went to a music store and showed our kids all these instruments. Like, what looks interesting to you? What do you think
That's
you
so
might want to
cool.
play? Because both of us, I started band because of exposure from dad. And then my husband went to a thing in school where they showed a French horn and he fell in love with the French horn and ended up in band. And so, especially if you want your kids to be musical, they have to have the exposure to things.
Yeah, like I do like the idea of taking them out to symphonies, performances. We've only done it like a couple times. I don't know why that hasn't gelled for us as a family, but I definitely we need more exposure doing that.
Well,
Um,
and you can find some of it in your community. Just yesterday, I took our youngest to a special story time at the library where BYU had this quintet of students that came and did like a presentation for kids. And by the end of it, my little 4-year-old was in love with the bassoon.
that's so interesting. Oh, that reminds me of another influence we had growing up was that movie Peter and the Wolf, the Disney cartoon. It shows
Oh,
the
yeah, yeah.
instruments and then it has a little animation of how the instruments play their pitches and whatever.
Yeah.
That was cool. Okay, another thing about learning environment. Let's talk about outdoors. So I have learned the value of having an open yard for them to explore in versus a manicured yard. Okay, Laura, you're really good at this. You guys are kind of rural-ish, and
Uh-huh.
I feel like you guys have always been good at leaving your yard wild because the kids go out and it's easier to explore and find wild stuff if it's not perfectly manicured grass lawn, right? So do you want to talk about that, Laura?
It makes me think of when, yeah, my kids do that, but I think of when cousins visit, and that's what they do. They go all the way down to a ravine, which is kind of a climb, and they find things and they can imagine.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
You
they
guys,
enjoy
okay.
it.
So Laura, your family is a huge outdoor family, a lot more so than us, any of the other Greenwiches maybe, because we weren't super, like, we went hiking at Red Rock a few times growing up, but like, how did you guys, did that come from John's family or how did you guys get so into being an outdoor family?
Well, John enjoys it too, but I think I enjoyed it more growing up too and encouraged that. So I remember in high school going camping with dad and a brother and my friend. So it's just something I latched
So
onto
even though
more.
we just did it a bit growing up, but you latched onto it and that was important to you to build your family on. Because
Well,
it's
we did it enough growing up that we go camping every year too.
Okay, well, we don't.
But Paul came from a background that he was always like backpacking and like pretty heavy outdoors stuff. So
Yeah,
there's,
it's just like
yes,
we think of the Nymans, Laura's family, and we think hikes. Like whenever we're with them, we're going on a hike. And whenever they come to visit us, they're going out to the Great Salt Lake and they
yep,
need to go places and be out in nature. And that's so inspiring. So thank you for setting that example to us, Laura.
yep. We
Mhm.
take them on hikes when they're in our area too.
So one thing, okay, another thing that my family is good at, Emily, you talked about how special it was for dad to take you out to jazz concerts. And
Mhm.
so we have found the culture of going to the theater, and that's not something we did growing up, but I mean, we moved to Utah and Jolene took me to Hale Center Theater once, and it opened my eyes to theater. I was like, wow, this is such a good experience. And I learned that it's pricey, but then I just kind of had a change of heart and I was like, this is worth the investment. Like, we need this in our culture. So going to plays, and then like this has been like my thing with Elizabeth. She'll be my play buddy. And we don't see all the plays. I really like any musical that's based on dance, but then anything that's based on a classic that's like historical. Like, I never read the book Scarlet Pimpernel until I saw the play. And I was like, this story is so awesome. I want to read the book. And then I saw the Tale of Two Cities play, and I read that book in high school, but I didn't get really into it. But the play was awesome. I mean, both of those are based on the same time period, but there have been several other plays that are based on classic literature, and it can get you more interested to engage with those classic stories.
Mhm.
Yep.
You know, not to mention, of course, the fine arts, the dance and the music. What about food? Do you guys have a culture of food that plays into education? It
Yeah.
could be, yeah, Emily, you got me into ethnic food. So tell us about, because you're the country person. So tell us about food.
Well, it's more than ethnic food, I think, at her house. But a big thing for me falling in love with anthropology and cultures was the ethnic food. And some of my favorite restaurants I've been to are tiny, hole in the wall restaurants that sometimes are hard to find. And even some of them have been in different countries that I've been to. And so periodically with my kids, because it gets boring sometimes trying to figure out what to cook, like meal plan. I love cooking, but sometimes the meal planning, like trying to figure out what everyone will eat, is just exhausting. And so I'll tell my kids, tell me a country that we should eat something from this week. And so I let them pick countries, and then we get on Pinterest and we find different recipes. And then if they want to help me cook, I try to remember, like, okay, this is how they're learning. And so I'll like open this can, put 1 cup of this in here. And it goes beyond into like, I also like baking too. And so they've started wanting to learn how to bake. And so I took my oldest one day and I said, I told him when I was growing up, I would make cookies and my mom would let me do most of it, but then she would help me know when it was done cooking. And you have some cousins about your age that they made cookies last time we were at their house. And so I think it's time that you start learning how to make cookies. And I was like, okay. And so I sat there and I told him what to do. And I told him, I'm not putting anything in the bowl for you. You're going to put everything in the bowl. I will tell you what to do and I will help you know when they're done cooking. But everything else you're going to do.
Kids love cooking, and we shy away from it sometimes because it's so messy. And if they mess up, it can get costly. But all kids love cooking. What a great way to make them curious. And you can tie that into countries or regions, or it can just be this experience of being independent, or the experience of being creative, right? A big part of learning is being creative. Eden and Allison have both written their own recipes. Like, it's somewhat random. They just get a pen and start writing a recipe. And so Eden did this once. She wrote down a random recipe and then she wanted to make it. And so I was like, okay, have fun. And because she just made up her quantities of different ingredients. And I don't remember how it turned out, but even when she tried to follow a recipe a couple weeks ago, it didn't turn out very well, but it was still an adventure. She enjoyed it. And so Allison has started doing that. And I have mixed feelings. It is really inconvenient. It is really messy. And I'm not a big baker. I don't do baking. And if I'm cooking, I would rather just cook it and get it over with. But now, just as a regular mom, not even a homeschool mom, I am trying to be like, okay, let's assign them nights where they can help cook because they need to learn too. So that's something that's hard for me to do, but I totally see the value and I'm trying to do that more. Laura, what about you? Do you have your kids cook?
They don't help me cook that often, but they've all gone, well, most of them have gone through a baking phase where they want to, and they just do it independently. They have a recipe book and they make it. And so that's my third right now, the 11-year-old. She likes to do that.
No, fun. We've used ethnic food as a way to motivate them to learn about that. Like, so this started a couple summers ago. Some people were recommending books to me, and so I got into books from other countries. And then I had this idea, like, well, if we're gonna, oh, I think it started to bribe my kids to read the book because this was over the summer. I was like, we're gonna read Heart of a Samurai. It started with that, and then let's pick something else from Japan. So then we went with The Big Wave, or I gave them an option of another one. Another good book is Dolls of Hope. So we did this Japan thing, and then I said, everyone's gonna read, choose a book, we're gonna read a book, and then we're gonna have a couple lessons. We joined with another family, and they had all these cool musical instruments or toys, Japanese toys. So we learned about Japan, and then it was 3 families. We all went out for sushi together, right? And that's kind of pricey, so that cost me some money, but it was such a good experience to do this whole unit randomly, spontaneously. It didn't fill any educational requirements necessarily, but then that opened my eyes to doing that for other countries. And that school year at our co-op, I was teaching a literature class. So it was just books, but then I got this idea. I was like, okay, wherever this book takes place, we're going to do some things about that. So we read The Death of Ivan Ilyich. That's an interesting book, but that's Russia. And I had the students over and they built a 3D puzzle of St. Basil's Cathedral. And then we made Russian food. I forget what they're called, but little meat pockets. And then they were supposed to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And I was like, well, let's do some Deep South fried okra. Like, come over and let, like, whatever culture the book is about, even though you usually use To Kill a Mockingbird to talk about social issues, but it's like, we're just going to learn the culture too. Wherever a book takes place, let's have some fun with that and learn about that.
Well, if you really want kids to love what they're learning, you giving them different experiences like that really helped a lot. Like when I was in college, I took a Chinese culture class and a Peoples of India class. And in both those classes, the teacher decided that we should just eat food from there. But it doesn't have to just be, I think, the ethnic thing, because the food thing reminds me of Mrs. Johnson, who was my 8th grade English teacher. And she would periodically, because our period was right, I think we were either right before lunch or right after lunch. And she decided, since we're so close to lunch, we need to have food in class. And so she would come up with these literary excuses for us to have food in class. And what the one time that was like the most fun for me is we had this class project where everyone was supposed to get together in pairs. I think there was like 2 or 3 of us in a group, and we were supposed to come up with a food that wasn't actually what it said. So like frog eye salad or grasshopper pie. And these are all literary devices, right?
That's a metaphorical versus literal. That's so fun.
Yeah, so we had this class where everyone, their little groups, their group projects brought in a food that fit into one of these categories.
Yeah.
And then she was like, and just in case anyone asks me about it, we'll just write a paragraph when we're done about this and this. But it made her class was just so fun. And
Wow.
I never
knew
really
you
liked,
could tie food into writing, right?
yeah, like you can tie food into all sorts of things.
I mean, food is life. People eat every day. I'm sure you could tie it into all subjects, right?
Yeah, and you know, some people get frustrated, like, oh, every activity I go to, there has to be food. But the reality is that people like food. And so if you can get food involved into things, then
Yeah.
they want to learn about what you're talking about more.
Yeah.
I've had a book for a while. It's called Gobble Up Math, but it's geared like kindergarten to 2nd grade, but it's math using food. And so even now that my kids are all older, they want to use that book for the twins we babysit and do some activities in there. So we did that recently. We got out some crackers, 3 different shapes, and they made patterns with the shapes.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about books. I want to touch back on TV, actually. There's a lot of talk on minimizing TV and stuff, but like, so realistically, a lot of families do use TV, and I've even found as a literature teacher, I've loosened up and let them watch the movie sometimes, or we'll assign a movie instead of a book so we can all do that. Because I've discovered in my life, you can read a book for 12 hours or you can watch a movie in 2 hours and you can have the same discussion based on the themes, the principles, the characters.
Well, I think though sometimes you have to be careful about how well the movie was made though. Like
Yeah.
I read a book recently called, well, everyone's probably heard of it, Boys in the Boat.
Yeah. All
And
right. I
I read Boys in the Boat before I watched the movie Boys in the Boat. And I feel like based off of the book, your conversation can be completely different than the movie because of how they changed the movie from the real story.
So then in that
Mm.
case, I would have them do both, and then write a comparison contrast essay.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So I
but then
think,
there's so many good movies that aren't based on a book, right? There's
yeah,
entire genre of historical fiction movies or movies that take place in another country, and those are so educational, and I don't want to discount them. So this summer we did a movie club. I mean, at first I was doing it with the older kids, doing historical stuff, and then I got into it with the elementary age, and we just invited people to join us, and we hosted a movie club. Every week there was a movie that we were talking about, and we had like a classroom literature style discussion just based on a movie, but a lot of them were classics like The Secret Garden, where there's some deeper stuff to talk about. But then Eden really insisted on we watched Trolls, and it's not super rich, but we found every movie has a lesson. So, and I've trained my kids so much, like we talk about this so much. This is our family culture. They will watch Barbie and then they'll tell me the lesson. Or if I say you can't watch that because it's not educational, they'll prove to me that it is. So this started with Elizabeth. Elizabeth is really into her fantasy novels, and I was like, yeah, fantasy. And so she was on this mission to prove to me that fantasy novels are educational and that they're worth reading. So she wrote me several essays about the Wings of Fire books. And then Eden got inspired by that. And I was complaining about them watching Barbie. And so Eden wrote me an essay about Barbie and all the good things Barbie teaches. And so I'm like, I stand corrected. Okay, I'm really impressed with my kids have learned to debate and to stand up for themselves, right? To make their argument through TV.
yeah.
So yeah, whenever we watch TV, we try to just talk about it. Even if it's like pausing it in the middle of a show. What were you saying about this, Emily?
Oh, I was saying, coming from a religious household, there are definite morals that we try to teach our kids that unfortunately the world doesn't always agree with the morals that we would like our kids to have.
Yeah.
And so if we're watching a show and something comes up that is contrary to the moral that we espouse in our family, we have made a commitment to stop the show right then and talk about it. Because the reality is we live in a world that I cannot shelter my kids from everything. They will be exposed to it somewhere. And so it's better that I stop the show right there and we talk about whatever the issue is, and so that they know it from like a truth standpoint, as opposed to I just let them go out in the world and let some little child with a phone teach them what
Yeah.
they believe to be true.
That's
And
such
what
a
I'm
go ahead, Laura.
hearing from this is to make your screen time educational. It has to be a family activity
So you can have
where you
conversations.
talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was
It
just
can't be individual, everyone on their own screen and they don't even know what they're doing.
exactly right.
Yeah.
That's when kids are really influenced by the world, is when you don't know what they're getting into. They just have their own private time with their screen, doing whatever entertainment they want, right? So last
Yep.
night I was at an event, and I want to put in a plug for this lady, Amy. The business is called Mama Bear Apologetics. And so it's a Christian thing. And she was talking about this issue, just what you said, Emily. She's like saying, the answer isn't to shelter our kids and to keep them away from secular stuff. It's to be aware of what they're being exposed to and have this ongoing conversation. And just say, what principle are they teaching? And you can work in some worldviews. Like, do you see how that's Marxist? And then bring in, well, what do we believe? And like, what is this teaching about the value of life or whatever the thing is? And then open up the Bible. What is the actual value of life? And so just use it as a teaching moment, because that way they get familiar with what's actually going on in the world, what's mainstream, but then they learn the apologetic answer to how they can defend true morality based on Christian principles.
But I also think it teaches kids, when we stop things and talk about stuff and we have open conversations about anything, I think it also teaches kids that they can come to us and talk about things. So like, for instance, my kids, they go to their the charter school 1.5 days a week. And yesterday was their first day and they came home. And one of my kids told me that he had had kind of a bad day. And part of the reason was that there was a kid sitting at his table in first grade who kept talking about how he was going to die and everyone else in the class was going to die, and all day long talking about how people are going to die. And then my other kid in like a snack time where people were out of their classroom also heard the kid talking about how everyone was going to die. And this was a little bit like took me aback as a mom. And I know enough people at the school that I put quite a few people on an email to address it. But my husband and I were talking about later how grateful we are that we have this culture set up where we talk about things and learn about things, so that when things like this happen, they can come to us and say, this happened and I wasn't comfortable about it. And then we can talk about it.
So I want to segue there. Talking, we have found a great time for talking is in the car, right? And so car
Yes.
conversations are so valuable. One thing she said last night, this is kind of true in my family, I wonder if it's true for you guys, is like they after 20 minutes or so in the car, they're bored and they want to talk. But that's when like deeper things come up, especially if you have a passenger, because then it's like, okay, it's just you and me. We're in the car for a while. This is the time to have my undivided attention. This is the time to talk. And so you can bond through that way. You can talk over their concerns, or you can talk, it doesn't have to be academic, but this came up when our family was young because I can't remember why we were in the car a lot, but it just seemed like whenever we were going to the grocery store or the gym or whichever direction we were headed, I was like, I'm always a multitasker. So it's like, well, let's make use of this time. So we'd be in the car for 15 minutes and I'd be like, time for times tables or spelling words. And we just do it verbally, like without a worksheet, without a pen. We just do it verbally in the car. And when it was kind of a fun season when Richard was on times tables and Elizabeth was on addition, I would say two numbers and they would race. Richard would try to find the product and Elizabeth would try to find the sum. So and it just worked out perfectly with the levels they were at. They both needed about like 4 seconds to think about it. And so they kept track of their points. And this is just, verbally while we're driving somewhere, you can whenever you get bored in the car, even if you have 5 minutes, it's like time for some spelling or times tables.
Well, and sometimes they think it's good though, whatever the kid is wanting to talk about. So like in our family, we do once a week is dad takes one of the kids to do something one-on-one. And one of the days is mom takes one of the kids to do something one-on-one. And sometimes it's in the house, sometimes it's out of the house. But when we get in the car, it's interesting when it's just me and one kid, what they come up with. And so like our 6-year-old the other day, I said, Walter, tell me something funny. And he was like, I can't think of anything funny. I said, well, what do you want to talk about? And he said, I want to play Would You Rather. Like, would you rather live in a tree or live in a hole, like just make up things? And I was like, okay. And but then that's still like educational there, like a culture of learning, because I was thinking of these like crazy wild would you rather this or that, and he was really having to think through what he would rather do, because and then I would say, okay, why would you rather do that? And so it went back into more of the like the logic thinking thing, but we took at it from a standpoint of what he told me he wanted to talk about.
That's great. I love that. I usually think that game is just like ridiculous and it drives me nuts. But we don't turn it into conversations, right? And that even makes me think, because I teach creative writing where we have a random writing prompt and they just come up with whatever they come up with. There's a reason you can't do that in the car. So just take a look at what you're seeing in the car. Like, okay, look at that cow over there. Tell me about his childhood. Come up with a creative idea. Like, what problem does that cow have? What is the world like from his perspective? So you can encourage creativity through these conversations too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're wrapping up. Anything else you feel like we haven't covered? Did you have any notes that you wanted to talk about, either of you?
The only thought I thought of as I was preparing or thinking about this was you talked about music already, but growing up. And so we do a lot of music, but I never felt like it was ever mandatory. And it helps to have
Oh
a
yeah.
piano in a convenient place. So the piano's just always there for people to pound on or whatever. we tried to discourage the pounding, but so my kids have played the piano, not because I told them to, but they wanted to.
It's another part of creating a environment, right? If something's available to them and if they're bored, they're gonna go try it out. Like
Yeah.
Edith's been writing her own songs on the piano, you know, they're pretty rudimentary, but she just started messing around on the piano and figuring out what sounds good together, you know, and finding out what
Mhm.
and then she's writing it down in her own language. But and
Well, I
she
think Peter is like a really good example of that. Our brother Peter, because he plays the piano pretty decent and he's pretty good on the guitar, and he's self-taught on both of them. Like,
Mhm.
so sometimes the curiosity leads into like, do you want to know more about that? Do you want me to get you a teacher? But
Yeah.
sometimes kids are just curious enough that you can sit them down with something and they can just go off on it. And so, you know, you have parents that have to go to work or they have church obligations or whatever it is that they're doing. And they might think, I don't have the time, but you can get in with your kids and figure out like, what are they really interested with? And then give them the structure to be able to learn on their own, which I think is important because as they grow up and become adults and things, I'm not going to be able to follow them around all the time and be like, let me show you how to do XYZ.
Yeah. Let them be bored, let them do it on their own. I think it's a miracle when kids just get into something all by themselves. Like Elizabeth got into this crochet thing and it's a huge thing for her. And like she didn't get it from me. I don't crochet and I can't even she knows, but I can't really put my finger on when she got into that. Like I did not sit down and teach her. I did not say, here, let's find out how to do this. She came across a book and that made her curious and she just started learning how to do it like on her own, right? So I think every kid maybe has one thing where that has happened to them, but it's rare enough that it's kind of like this beautiful miracle, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I want to sum up that I hope we have done a very good job of illustrating is like learning isn't just reading books. Like there's 7 kinds of smart, and I really try to show this to my students because not everybody is going to be interested in reading books, but learning is about music or about people, learning about different people, engaging with different people, having conversations. Learning is about your body. Like someone's type of smart, maybe in their free time, they really just want to get into working out. That was Richin. And then that led to nutrition and physiology. And what else can you learn about the body just because he wanted to build some muscles? And that's another thing he did entirely on his own. Well, kind of. He saw me working out, but he really got into that in a big way on his own. What are the other 7 kinds of smart? You know, there's pictures. So we talk about art. There's even self-smart. I kind of mentioned how I got into self-help books and psychology. That's self-smart because it's you kind of reflecting and thinking to yourself. And all of these things count as learning. All of these things can lead to careers. There's careers in all of these areas. So if someone doesn't love reading, there's definitely other options for them to grow and learn about the world and find a career path, right?
Right.
Okay, well, thanks for being with us. We'll just stop the recording there. And I hope this has inspired some people, whether you're homeschooling or public schooling, just to know that you can inspire your kids through your own example, through the environment in your home, through the conversations you have and the opportunities that they get to be curious about the world and to just seek learning for the fun of it, not because it's required for anything, not because it's something they have to do, but just creating that family culture so it's something as a family everybody enjoys. So thanks for joining us today.